Hello, today I'll be doing a how to set up and play on the board game The Last Kingdom. I just got this earlier in the week. I did an unboxing video on it a couple of days ago. Of course it's based on the Netflix series The Last Kingdom, which was very good in my opinion. Anyway, I've played this once by myself, playing as 3 players. I have some, the rule book does have a few conflicting statements in there and some things that are not too clear, but I think I've got it understood pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and do a how to set up and play on The Last Kingdom, the board game. Let's get started with setup. As usual, the first thing you'll do is place the game board in the center of the play area. You'll take these 7 action plaques and shuffle them up and then place them in the market action, place them above the market action track here above the board. Now you do want to be sure which side you have these turned to, because there is a 2-player side. So if you're playing with more than 2 players, then you'll want to use the other side. I'm going to be setting up for a 3-player game, so I'll use this side. So I'm going to shuffle these up and then I'll put them up here. Alright, so I've got the 7 action plaques laid out in the market action spaces. Players then choose one of the leader mats that are available in the game. You can have the players choose them, or you can deal them out randomly. There is a suggested or recommended leaders to use, so it says if you're playing your first 3-player game, you should use Uhtred, King Alfred, and Guthrum. So that's who we will use for this setup. Players then look at the initiative number here on their leader mat. So Uhtred is a 1, King Alfred is an 8, and Guthrum is a 5. You'll give the person with the lowest initiative the conflict token, which is this Thor's hammer token. Then you'll give this succession token to the player with the second lowest initiative, so that will be Guthrum, so we'll give that to him. You'll then give each player their 2 leader cards that has the picture of their leader that's on their player mat. You'll give each player their 4 matching affinity markers. You'll give each player their matching figure, the figure that matches the picture here on their leader mat. So for Uhtred, this would be his figure. Give each player an allegiance ring. And finally, you would give each player one of these screens to put in their play area, and that's where you would keep your victory points and action tokens behind that screen, so other players don't know how many you have of those. And it's also got a little player aid on there. Since I'm going to be playing solo, I'm not going to use these player screens, but if you're not playing solo, then you would want to use those to keep secret from the other players, how many victory points and how many action tokens you have. Players should also get an allegiance marker. You'll flip that allegiance marker to the side that your leader starts on. His starting allegiance is Dane, so he would keep his allegiance marker flipped to the Dane side, whereas Alfred's starting allegiance is Saxon, so he would flip that allegiance marker to its Saxon side. You then place your starting figure where it says your starting region is. So for Uhtred, it's Northumbria, and you take the allegiance ring and you'll put your figure in that ring with the side up that shows his allegiance. So this side up for Dane allegiance and this side up for Saxon allegiance. So Uhtred starts in Northumbria here with Dane allegiance, whereas Alfred starts in Wessex with Saxon allegiance, so his figure goes here in Wessex and his allegiance ring flipped to the Saxon side. And Guthrum starts in East Anglia with Dane allegiance. You then take your starting action tokens that's displayed on your leader mat. So for Uhtred he gets 5. And then you would place those behind your player screen if you're using those, if you're playing with other players. Alfred starts with 7 action tokens as seen here, so I've got those placed here. Again, those would be behind your player screen. And Guthrum starts with 6 action tokens, which I have here, and we'll just put those in his play area since we're not using the player screen. You then place your 4 starting affinity, depending on what it says on your leader mat for your starting affinity. So Uhtred starts with 2 Dane affinity, so he'll put one of his markers here on the Dane track. He starts with 1 West Saxon affinity, so we'll put one of his markers there. He starts with 1 Mercian affinity, so we will put that there. And he starts with 0 Northumbrian affinity, so we'll put his marker there. So let me do that for the other players. Alright, so I've got the other players' affinity markers placed out as it's specified on their leader mat. Now one thing to mention for King Alfred, he starts with 0 Dane affinity and he can never gain Dane affinity. If any game effect would cause Alfred to change allegiance or gain Dane affinity, instead he gains 5 victory points. So he'll never change allegiance to Dane and he will never gain Dane affinity. Instead, if something would cause him to do one of those 2 things, he gains 5 victory points, and that's stated right here on his leader mat. You then separate the army tokens and place them into their pools on the right side of the board. So Danes, West Saxons, Mercians, and Northumbrians. The figures all look the same, they just are the color of their of which allegiance they belong to. But anyway, they do all look the same. Anyway, you place them in their pools on the side of the board next to their colored shields. You then look at each region on the board and place the armies, designated armies, as shown there. So 2 Dane armies, 2 Northumbrian armies, and then the question mark will be drawn randomly, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. So 2 Dane armies, 2 Northumbrian here, 1 Dane, 2 Northumbrian here, 1 Dane, 3 Mercian, here 2 Dane, 1 Mercian, and here 3 West Saxons. And then we got to do the question marks in each one. So you take this bag that came with the game. In that you'll place 8 army figures. You'll put 5 Danes, 1 West Saxon, 1 Mercian, and 1 Northumbrian. So I've got those added into the bag. You'll then mix those up and then draw 1 out for each question mark in each region. So here, Northumbria, I'll draw random. I got a Dane. For here in Wales, I got to draw 2 random from this bag. I got a Dane and a West Saxon. Here in Mercia, got to draw 1 random. Got a Mercian. Here in East Anglia, 2 random. I got a Dane and another Dane. And finally in Wessex, 2 random. So that's my 2 remaining in my bag. That is a Northumbrian and a Dane. Then that's all this bag is used for, so that can just go back in the box. And just separate and set aside your victory point tokens, your action tokens, and your peace tokens and place them somewhere near the board. You'll take the Prepare for Invasion token, which is this ship, and just place it here on the Prepare for Invasion spot on the board. Place allegiance rings that are not currently being used just somewhere near the board. Place these 2 strength markers on the 0 space of the conflict region track at the bottom of the board. You'll take your round 1 deck, the cards with this 1 on the back. Go through that deck and find all the cards with this hero symbol on them and remove them from the deck. Once you have all the cards with the hero symbol removed from that deck, you'll look for all ones that match a character that is currently a leader in play. So for instance, Uhtred. He's currently in play, so you'll remove that hero card from deck 1 and just put it back in the box. After you remove any heroes that are currently in play from the hero cards, you'll then randomly select 3 of those cards, those remaining hero cards. So 1, 2, 3. You'll shuffle those without looking at them back into the round 1 deck, and then without looking at what other heroes were not selected, you just return them to the box. You then place that round 1 deck on its designated space on the board, and then you'll do the exact same thing with the round 2 deck. Go through, look for any hero cards. So for instance, in the round 2 hero cards, we have Guthrum and King Alfred. Since those are characters in play, we'll remove them, return them to the box. Well then, from the remaining hero cards, randomly select 3 and shuffle those 3 without looking at them into the rest of the round 2 cards, and return the other hero cards that were not selected back to the box without looking at them. We then place the round 2 deck in its designated spot on the board, and that completes setup. We should be ready to begin with how to play. Alright, so how do we play? Well, the game is played in 2 rounds. In each round you have a draft phase, then a conflict phase, and then the final phase in round 1 is the cleanup phase, and the final phase in round 2 is the final scoring phase. So we'll talk about round 1, the draft phase. So the first thing you'll do is each player will be dealt 5 cards from the round 1 deck. Alright, so I've dealt each of my players 5 cards from the round 1 deck. Then each player will select 1 card out of those 5 to keep in their hand, and then they'll pass the other 4 cards to the left, to the player on their left. So for example, Uhtred draws this, or decides to keep this card in his hand, and he passes these 4 cards to the player on his left, which would be Guthrum. In the meanwhile, Guthrum and King Alfred would do the same. So after you receive the 4 cards from the player on your left, well, after you've passed 4 cards from the player to your left, you'll be receiving the cards from the player on your right. Then you'll choose one of those cards, add it to your hand, and then pass the remaining 3. You'll do that until you have 1 card left that you would pass, and then instead of passing that, you just put it into a discard pile for the round 1 cards. So let me complete the draft. So we'll just say Uhtred was just passed the final 2 cards in the draft from the player on his right. He would select 1 to keep, and then discard the other one. You just create a discard pile somewhere near the board for the round 2 card, or for the round 1 cards. The other players all do the same. So in the end, each player should have 4 round 1 cards plus their 2 leader cards, giving them a hand of 6 cards. Then, if any of your hand of cards has this instant symbol at the top, you'll immediately play that face up into your play area and resolve it. So in this case, this Brutal Tactics card, Uhtred would gain 1 action token. So he would put that, with his other action tokens behind his screen. And that has a permanent effect. Whenever 1 or more armies of your opposing allegiance are removed for any reason, you gain 1 victory point. So that's the only instant card that Uhtred has, so the rest he would just keep in his hand. Guthrum did not get any instant cards. And Alfred got 1 instant card, so he would play that immediately into his play area. He would gain 1 Dane affinity, but remember, Alfred has a power where he cannot gain Dane affinity, and if he ever would gain Dane affinity, instead he gains 5 victory points. So he would take a 5 victory point counter and put that behind his player screen along with his action tokens. Alright, Alfred doesn't have any other instant cards, but anyway, if players did have any other instant cards, they would play them immediately face up in their play area and resolve their effects, and if they have any permanent effects, then keep those in mind for the rest of the game. Once everybody's done that, that ends the draft phase. And we move on to the conflict phase. At the beginning of, or in round 1, at the beginning of the conflict phase, the person with the lowest initiative, which was Uhtred, places the conflict token in one of the 5 regions, and that will be where the first conflict takes place. We'll just say since Uhtred is up here in Northumbria, that's where he's going to choose to place the conflict token. Now he doesn't have to choose the region that he's in. He could have chose any of the 5 regions, but I'm just going to have him choose the one that he's in. Once the conflict region is chosen, you immediately set the strengths for that region. So for the Danes, each army is worth 1 point of strength, and normally a leader or hero is also worth 1 point of strength. But Uhtred has an ability, permanent ability. Uhtred is strength 2 in round 1 and strength 3 in round 2. So we're in round 1, so he's strength 2. So the Danes have 1, 2, 3, and then because Uhtred is currently has Dane allegiance, he will count toward Dane strength, and he has 2 strength in round 1. So the Danes have a total of 5 strength, so they'll move this strength marker to 5. The Saxons just have 2 armies in here, Northumbrian armies, each worth 1 strength, so their strength is currently at 2. So currently the Danes are winning the conflict, which takes place in Northumbria. Next, the player with the second most initiative, which was Guthrum, who had a 5, takes the succession token and places it on one of the remaining regions. This will be the region where the next conflict will take place after the conflict in Northumbria is resolved. So Guthrum can choose any of the remaining regions, and we'll just say he's going to choose where he's at. Again, you don't have to, that doesn't have to be the choice. He could choose any of the other regions, but he's going to choose the region that he's in, so he's going to put it in East Anglia. And again, that just marks where the next conflict will take place, where the conflict token will move to after the conflict in Northumbria is resolved. And then the player with the third and lowest initiative will take the first turn of the conflict phase. So that will be Alfred, since we're just playing a 3-player game. Now, I will mention here, there are some different rules for a 2-player game. There's even some different tokens that are used, this momentum token and lock token. I'm not going to go over the rules for the two-player game here, but I just will mention that there are few little differences for a two-player game, but we're just going to be talking about something other than a two-player game, a three-player game in this instance. So Alfred will take the first turn of the conflict phase. So before resolving the conflict, the players will take turns going in clockwise orders, again starting with the player with the third lowest initiative in this first round, which is Alfred, so he'll take a turn. Then Uhtred, Guthrum, and so forth will continue taking turns until all players have passed consecutively, and once that is done, we'll resolve the conflict. Now, you can pass, and as long as all the other players do not pass, then when it comes back to your turn, then you can decide to take another turn again if possible. So passing does not necessarily end your chances of taking a turn for this conflict as long as everybody doesn't pass consecutively. But if that happens, if you pass and then the other players all pass, then that will end the opportunity to take turns and you'll immediately go to resolving the conflict. So on your turn, you can take any number of secondary actions. Secondary actions are make cards that have a symbol like this and it says secondary action, or some of these market actions show secondary actions there. So you can take any number of secondary actions on your turn, but you can only take one primary actions, and primary actions are marked with this symbol here. So these cards are primary actions, and some of these market actions up here are also primary actions. So as soon as you take a primary action, that ends your turn after you resolve that primary action. So if you're going to take a secondary action, you would take that before you take a primary action. Now, the other thing besides taking secondary action and primary action is you can pass, as I talked about a little bit ago. You can take secondary actions and then still pass after that. However, you can't take a primary action and then pass. Once you take a primary action, that ends your turn and it goes to the next player. There's one other thing, as I mentioned, when it comes to your turn, if you don't want to take an action, you can pass, and then it goes to the next player, and then when it comes back to you, as long as everybody hasn't passed, you can still take another turn. However, one special kind of pass you can take is if you pass and take the Prepare for Invasion token. If you do that, it gives you a benefit. First of all, you get one action token for every peace token that's on the board. Of course, before the end of the first conflict, there wouldn't be any peace tokens on the board, so you wouldn't get an action token. But if you take the Prepare for Invasion token, then you pass, but then you have no other opportunity to play again during that conflict. So even if the other players don't pass consecutively, when it would come back to you, you're just automatically passed. You can't take any further actions during that conflict. But it does give you a benefit that when you start the next conflict, you'll get to take the succession token and decide where the next conflict will be. So at the beginning of the next conflict, the conflict token will move here to East Anglia. If you, during this conflict, you took the Prepare for Invasion token, then you would get to take the succession token and choose where the next conflict after that will take place. But again, once you take that, then you can't take any more turns, any more actions that conflict phase, or that during that conflict. And we'll see more about how that works if you watch the example turns. So let's talk more about taking an action. As I said, you can take one of the market actions. To do that, you have to pay the cost in action tokens to take the action on that market action plaque. So for instance, if a player wanted to take this action to C is to be wise, that lets you change your allegiance. So you can change from Dane to Saxon or from Saxon to Dane. If you wanted to do that, it is a primary action. So once you took that, you wouldn't be able to take any further actions. But you would pay 3 of your action tokens and then take that action. Then you slide all the other plaques down and put this one at the end. So now that one, if you wanted to take it again, it is much more costly. It now costs 6 action tokens to take that. And as these slide down, they become cheaper. And I'll just talk about what each of these possible actions are. So as I said, that one lets you change allegiance. This one lets you, again, this one is a secondary action, so it's not that wouldn't end your turn if you took that. That allows you to draw 3 cards from the round 2 deck, keep one, add it to your hand, and then discard the other 2 to the bottom of the round 2 deck. This one, make the right choice, lets you gain 1 affinity of your choice. So not all of them, you choose one and gain 1 affinity, sliding your marker up with whichever one of those factions, I guess, that you want to choose. So you could gain a West Saxon affinity, a Mercian, a Northumbrian, or a Dane. The England is Born action lets you add 1 Mercian, 1 West Saxon, and 1 Northumbrian army, each into a different region of your choice, as long as they each go into a different region. I Am Dane lets you add 2 Dane armies to any region of your choice. No Mercy would let you remove 1 army from each of 2 adjacent regions. So again, they would have to be adjacent, share a border, so you could remove 1 army from here and 1 army from here, but you couldn't do 1 from Northumbria and 1 from Wessex because they're not adjacent. You can select 2 adjacent regions, remove 1 army from each of them, and then gain 2 victory points. And finally, I shall take what is mine. You can move 2 armies to an adjacent region, and from that region move 1 army to a different adjacent region. Now I will mention that whenever you see a question mark for moving armies on a card or on one of these tiles, you could use that. Besides moving an army, you could move one of your heroes or your leader. But I believe that is only for moving armies, like this one that lets you remove an army from, select 2 adjacent regions and remove an army from each. I don't believe that you could remove somebody else's hero or leader with that. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the game, the flip side of those is for 2 players, so they may be a little different for the 2-player side, and again, I'm not going to go over those. So you could take a market action, or you can also play one of your cards for its action. Again, if you play one that's a primary action, that ends your turn. And I'm not going to go over every possible card, but they pretty much have symbology like that is on those market action tiles, and they say down here exactly what they are. Like this one is move 1 army to an adjacent region and then remove up to 2 armies from that region, then gain 1 West Saxon, 1 Mercian, or 1 Northumbrian affinity. And if you play a card that's got a permanent ability, keep that in mind. Whenever you play a card, you just put it face up in your play area. Of course, remember, these are all in your hand. So Again, you can play any number of cards with a secondary action, but as soon as you play a card with a primary action, that ends your turn. And then it goes to the next player. Now, each leader card also has a primary action on it. For instance, Uhtred's is he can spend 2 of his action tokens to move Uhtred 1 region, and then he has this special power. After Uhtred moves, he may move 1 additional region. And so that's what players will do. They'll play a card or market action on their turn, or they'll pass. I'm trying to, what you would probably be trying to do is gain strength for your side, either Saxon or Dane, which, depending on which one you're currently allied with, which one you have allegiance with, of course, you can. There are abilities that let you switch allegiance, so you may pull that and kind of trick the other players at the last minute. But you're trying to gain strength into the region where the current conflict is, or maybe into the one where you know the next conflict is going to be. Once all players have passed, again, and you would not want to play every one of your cards because you're not going to get any more cards until the end of the round, unless you play a card or market action ability that lets you draw from the round 2 deck. But normally you won't have any more cards added to your hand, so you're not going to want to play all your cards just for one conflict. You got to think about the upcoming conflicts as well. But anyway, once all players have passed consecutively, then you go to resolving the conflict. Now, remember, as armies are added or moved, or heroes are added or removed to a region, as soon as something changed the strength in a region, the conflict strength track down here is immediately updated. So everybody always should know, what the current strength statistics are in a region. So, like if Uhtred moved out of that region on his turn, then you would immediately adjust the track down 2 because his 2 strength is now no longer in there. So I just wanted to mention that before we get to resolving the conflict. So once all players have passed consecutively, then you immediately resolve the conflict where the conflict token is. So whichever one has the higher strength at that time, you'll take a peace token and put it in that region, flip to the side that won the conflict. So in this case, the Danes have 5 strength, the Saxons have 2, so you would put the peace token in there on the Dane side. Then players will gain benefits for both being on the winning side of the conflict and being on the losing side of the conflict. Then each player on the winning side would be able to gain victory points by choosing up to 5 armies and or heroes that are in the conflict region that belong to the winning side, and then they score based on their affinity. So for instance, the Danes won this conflict, so we put the peace token to the Dane side. Now Uhtred, because he's got his allegiance as Dane, then he's one of the winners. So he can choose up to 5 armies, combination of 5 armies and or heroes that belong to him in that faction, score based on his affinity. So there's only 3 armies in there, so he would only be able to score 3 based on 3 Dane armies. His affinity is in this section for Danes, so that means he scores 2 victory points per Dane army in there. So he would score 6 victory points. So he would take those victory points and place them behind his player screen. You don't get to select your hero when scoring for victory points, though. You don't get to pick your leader. Now, if you had a hero, which those get placed by cards that you may have, if you had a hero in there, then you may get to score based on that. Now Guthrum also is has an allegiance of Dane, so he would also be on the winning side, and his affinity is also in this section, so he scores 2 victory points per figure he selects to score. Remember, you can select up to 5. There's only 3 Danes in there. They have to be figures from the winning side, so you couldn't choose these Saxon Northumbrian figures. So again, 3 figures, he scores 2 per figure, so he would also get 6 victory points. Just to show a different example, I've added some other Saxon players in there. So in this case, the Saxons would have 6 strength, and the Danes would only have 5. So then if we went to resolve this conflict, we would put the peace token in there on the Saxon side, and then the Saxon players would get to score based on figures in the region. I mean, based on the strength in the region. Well, because Uhtred and Guthrum are Dane, they're not on the winning side, so they wouldn't get to score. King Alfred, being Saxon, would get to score, so he could choose up to 5 of those figures. Now he has a higher affinity with West Saxons, so he would definitely probably want to choose the 3 West Saxons as part of his 5. He's in this section, so he would get 3 times 2. That would give him 6. And then he can still choose up to 2 other figures. Well, he has a higher affinity with the Northumbrians than he does with the Mercians, so he would score better choosing the last 2 figures, choosing those last 2 Northumbrians. So he would choose those as well, so that would give him another 2, so then he would score 2 points for each one of those, so that would give him another 4 points. So that would give him a total of 10 victory points. If he chose these 5 figures to score, there's 3 West Saxons, which he gets 2 points each for, so that's 6, and 2 Northumbrians, which he gets 2 points each for, so that's 4, so a total of 10. As your affinity moves up, you score more per figure in there. But now let's put it back to how we had before, where the Danes actually won. So after Uhtred and Guthrum both scored their victory points, then Alfred, who did not win, is on the losing side. Then he gets to gain 2 action tokens. Then there is also an on your own bonus. So if you're the only player that did not win, like in this case, the 2 players were on the winning side, Alfred was the only one on the losing side. So for losing, he got 2 action tokens, and since he was the only one on the losing side, he would get an additional 2 action tokens. If you are the only one on the winning side, then after you score your victory points, you score an additional 5 victory points. But again, that's only if you're the only one on the winning side. After the scoring, then you disband armies in excess of 5 in that region that was scored. In this case, there's only 5 armies in there, so you wouldn't have to disband any. But if the case were like this, where there's 6, then you have to disband armies. So the first thing you do, if you have more than 5 and you disband, the first thing you do is remove 1 from whichever side has the highest. So here we would remove 1 Dane. Then we would be down to 5, so we wouldn't need to worry with disbanding any further. However, if this was the case, we had these 7 armies in there. Well, first we would remove 1 from whichever one has the most, which would be the Danes. But then we still have more than 5 in there, so the next thing you do, if there's a tie for ones that still have the most, you remove 1 from each of them. And then if you're below 5, then your disbanding is good. And so you would go like that until you get down to 5 or below. After you've disbanded, you then reset for the next conflict. You move the conflict token to where the current succession token is. Whoever has the prepare for invasion token, whoever took that, gets to take the succession token and place it where they want the next conflict to take place after the current one. Of course, it cannot be placed in a region that already has a peace token in it. And if there's only one region left that is not going to have a peace token in it, then of course you don't need to place the succession token, because you know that'll be the only place where the next conflict will be able to take place. So it says you can just place it off the board. Frankly, I like to place it anyway just because I like the way it looks on the board. You then place the invasion token back on the board. Now I should mention, I was talking about when you're taking your actions that one thing you can do is pass and take the prepare for invasion token. If during the round nobody passed and took the prepare for invasion token, then the last person to pass, when everybody passed consecutively, just automatically gets the invasion token, but then they don't get the bonus. And then you move on to the next conflict, where you'll take actions with the conflict taking place wherever the current conflict token is. And that conflict will start with the player who's to the left of the last person to pass in the previous conflict. So if Uhtred had been the last person to pass in the first conflict, then Guthrum would take the first turn during the next conflict. And so you continue to play like that, taking actions until all 3 players pass consecutively. Then you resolve that conflict. As we talked about, then you'd move the conflict token to Wells, and whoever had the prepare for invasion token would move it to one of the remaining, until finally you've resolved conflicts in all 5 regions. Once you've resolved the conflict in the 5th region, then you move on to the cleanup phase at the end of round 1. So the first thing you do in the cleanup phase is gain tokens back up to the starting amount. So if you were down to 2, if Uhtred was down to 2 at the start of the cleanup phase, then he would gain 3 additional action tokens. So it's best to use all your action tokens during a round, because at the cleanup phase at the end of the round, you're only going to get tokens back up to your total. So if Uhtred still had 4 left, then he would only get 1. Alright, so everybody gets action tokens back up to their starting amount. Then you discard all the round 1 cards you played during round 1 to the round 1 discard pile. However, you will keep any cards that have a permanent effect, or any hero cards that you've played. You'll keep those, and they continue to have effect in round 2. If you still had any cards left in your hand, you discard those to their discard pile and gain 1 action token for each card you discarded. You return your 2 leader cards back to your hand. Remove all the peace tokens from the board. You give the conflict token to the player that last had the invasion token. You give the succession token to the player to the left of the player that now has the conflict token. If not already done, place the invasion token back on the board, and then the player to the left of the player who has the succession token will be the first player in the next in round 2 in the first conflict phase. You then start round 2, just like you start round 1, by dealing 5 round 2 cards to each player, doing the draft as we talked about with round 1. After the draft of round 2 cards, the player that has the conflict token will place it on a region of his choice. The player that has the succession token will place it on a region of his choice, and then you'll start playing with the player to the player of starting with the player to the left of the player that placed the succession token. Start the new conflict phase with just like we did in round 1, and again you'll play until all 5 conflicts have been resolved in each region, or each region has had a conflict resolved in it. But then after a final conflict is resolved at the end of phase 2, you don't go to the cleanup phase. At the end of round 2, you don't go to cleanup phase, you go to the final scoring phase. Players will add up their victory points, and whichever player has the most victory points is the winner. If there's a tie in victory points, then you look at the peace tokens on the board at the end of round 2. Whichever faction, Dane or Saxon, had the most peace tokens, whichever one of those players that was tied for most victory points, whichever one of them has the most peace tokens on the board, then they're the winner. If they both happen to be on the same side, have the same allegiance, then instead you total their affinity markers on the board. You add the total of their affinity levels for all 4 of their markers, and then whoever has the highest of that is the winner. And then if there's still a tie after that, whichever one of the leaders had the highest initiative level would be the winner. And that's how you play the game. So I'm going to reset it back to how it was right after setup, and then we'll go through a few example turns. Before I do that, I should mention, when you're resolving a conflict, if you go to resolve a conflict, all 3 players have passed, and the strength happens to be tied in a region, then instead of placing a peace token or doing any scoring or disbanding armies, instead you just move the conflict token and succession tokens like you would if you had resolved the conflict in that region. That region will remain unresolved at that point, and so later the succession token can get placed in that region again, and you'll have another conflict in that region. If the final region, final conflict region, happens to end in a tie for strength, then you just ignore that region. There'll be no scoring in that region at all, and you just move on. If that happens at the end of round 1, you just move on to the cleanup phase. If that happens at the end of round 2, you just move on to the final scoring phase. All right, I think I got everything back to how it was right after we did setup. So now we're going to start the draft in round 1. So I got to deal 5 cards to each player. Alright, I've done that. So now we'll just kind of go through a little bit of players selecting 1 card to keep and add to their hand. So Uhtred, since he's starting with Dane allegiance, he kind of likes this one. So he's going to add that one to his hand and pass these 4 to his left. So that'll come over here to Guthrum. Here's Guthrum's original 5. He's got to choose one. He's going to take Brita, the Brita hero card. He'll keep that and pass these to the left to Alfred. Alfred player's got to look at his original 5 and choose one. I don't know, he's going to keep this one, and he'll pass these to Uhtred now. So now Uhtred will have to go through and select one, keep it, and put it in his hand. So I'll go ahead and finish the draft off camera. Alright, so finishing the draft, I think Uhtred's going to take this card, and then he will discard this one. Guthrum is going to he'll take this one, discard this one, and King Alfred, he'll take this one and discard this one. Alright, then anybody that has instant actions has to do them. Uhtred doesn't have any. Everybody should have a hand of 6 cards. There are 2 leader cards and 4 round 1 cards. Alfred looks like he's got a couple of instant actions, so he's got this one. Gain 1 affinity with the faction you have least affinity with. He's got least affinity with looks like the Mercians, so he gains 1 affinity with the Mercians. Then gain 1 action token, so he'll do that. Alright, so we'll just set that over there. And he had another one. Gain 1 action token and 1 Mercian affinity. So he's moved up pretty good on Mercy and Affinity and got a couple more action tokens. So I'll just put that face up in his play area, and that just leaves him a few cards. Alright, Guthrum has an instant where he gains 1 action token and has a permanent ability. Once per turn before performing a market action, you may move the cheapest plaque to the most expensive slot and shift all plaques down. So he'll put that down and he'll go ahead and get his action token. And then he has another one, gain 1 Dane affinity. So that will shift him up. And he'll just put that in his play area, but he'll put it underneath that one since it doesn't have a permanent ability. And that looks like that. So now we start the conflict phase. So the person with the conflict token will place it, and I'm going to place it in Northumbria just as I did when I was doing my rules overview. And Guthrum will now place the succession token, and just like I did previously, I'm going to put that here. Although Guthrum should be here, I guess I didn't reset that after my rules overview. So I'm going to place that there, and now Alfred will take the first turn. Well, first, he's going to play this secondary action card, so that won't end his turn. It's one of his leader cards. If the Saxons have the higher strength in the region in Wessex, gain 1 Wessex or 1 West Saxon affinity. In Mercia, gain 1 Mercian affinity, and in Wales, gain 1 Northumbrian affinity. So he'll look at that. So in Wessex, the Saxons do have the higher strength. It's 3-2. So he does gain 1 West Saxon affinity. And then in Mercia, Mercians, the Saxons do have a higher strength. It's 4-1, so he gains 1 Mercian affinity. And in Wales, it's 3-2, so he gains 1 Northumbrian affinity. Alright, so that doesn't end his turn because that's not a primary action. Oh, I did forget when we put that conflicts token there, we should have gone ahead and set the strength for that region, and we know it's 5, 2 for Uhtred, and 3 for those Dane armies. Alright, so Alfred could still do a primary action, or he could pass. What I think he's going to do is another secondary action. He's going to spend 3 action tokens to draw 3 cards from the round 2 deck and keep 1. So he's going to spend 3 action tokens. He's going to draw 3 cards, keep 1, and the other 2 will go to the bottom. Let's see. I think he'll keep this Losses of War, put that in his hand, and he'll discard these 2 to the bottom of the round 2 deck. And now this shifts. So all these shift down. This goes to the last spot. Alright, got that straightened out. Now that was a secondary action also, so he could still take a primary action or pass. So I think he's going to play this Losses of War card that he just had primary action. So remove 1 army from any one region. So he's going to remove 1 from Northumbria. That will lower its strength by 1. And then that's not it. Here it is. Remove 1 army from any one region, then select 2 adjacent regions that are not the first region, and remove 1 army from each of the 2 regions. So I think he's going to remove 1 from East Anglia and 1 from Mercia. Alright, and now because that was a primary action, that's going to end his turn. Alright, I think first he'll play this secondary action Chaos. Draw 1 round 2 card off the top of the deck and add it to your hand. So he'll put that in his play area. He's going to draw a round 2 card, add it to his hand. And then I think he's going to do a market action. So he's going to spend 3 action tokens to do this secondary action, make the right choice, so he can gain an affinity. He's going to gain a Dane affinity. So let me shift these down. Alright, I shifted those all down, and then Uhtred's going to gain 1 Dane affinity. Now that was a secondary action, so I think he is just going to pass right now. I think Guthrum, he sees that they're winning the conflict in Northumbria, but they've only got 2 Danes in there, so they won't score very well even if they win that. So I think what he wants to do is this market action that costs 4, but what he's going to do, he's got this power. Once per turn before performing a market action, you may move the cheapest plaque to the most expensive slot and shift them all down. So he's going to move this and shift all these down. And then he's going to take this action, which is going to cost him 3 action tokens. So there's his 3. He's going to take I Am Dane, which allows him to put 2 Dane figures in any region. He's going to put them in Northumbria. And then we'll shift, since he took that one, now we got to shift these all down. And that was a primary action, so that's going to end his turn. Although because we added 2 Danes in there, we got to adjust our strength up 2. So now it's 6 to 2. Alright, it's Alfred's turn. I think he's pretty much given up. He sees that they're not gonna, he's not gonna win this conflict. So I think for now, he's gonna try to work on where he knows the next conflict is gonna be. So he's gonna play this primary action. Add 2 West Saxon armies to a region adjacent to a region with at least 2 Mercian armies. So there's 2 Mercian armies there, so he can add 2 West Saxon armies in East Anglia where he knows the next conflict will be. And then he also gains an action token, so he's going to play that. So he gets to add 2 West Saxon armies to East Anglia. And then he gets a action token. And that was a primary action, so that ends his turn. It's coming back to Uhtred. Again, he knows they're just going to win. he's just going to go ahead and take the prepare for invasion token. So now he has to permanently pass. He doesn't really get anything because there's no peace tokens on the board at this time, but he will get to decide where the succession token goes next. So he's permanently passed for this conflict. So now it comes back to Guthrum. He's going to go ahead and pass as well because he knows they're winning this conflict, and we'll come back to Arthur and he'll pass as well. So everybody's passed consecutively. So now we'll go ahead and score the conflict. So we know the Danes won, so we'll put a peace token in there, Dane side up, and now all the players on the Dane side, which are Uhtred and Guthrum, they get to score, so they can choose up to 5 armies and or heroes. There's no heroes in there, or heroes that belong to the person scoring, but there's no heroes. There's 4 Dane armies. Uhtred gets 2 points for each of those armies, so he gets 8 victory points. So we'll give him 5, 6, 7, 8. And of course that would be behind your player screen. Guthrum also scores. There's 4 he can choose from. Now he's a little higher, got a little higher infinity, so he gets 3 per player, so that gives him 12 victory points. 10, 11, 12. And then Alfred is the loser, so he'll gain 2 action tokens, and since he is he's the only loser, he gets an additional 2 action points, so he'll get 4 tokens. So he'll get 4 action tokens. Okay, now we have to disband armies because there's more than 5 in there. So first we remove one from the side that has the most. So that's a Dane, and that puts it down to 5, so we don't have to remove any more. Next we'll move the conflict token to the region with the succession token, so that'll be where the next conflict is. The player with the invasion token gets to choose where the succession token goes next. So he's going to choose Wales. Now place the invasion token back on the board. The player to the left of the player to pass last starts the first in the new conflict. The person that passed last was Alfred. So Uhtred will start. It'll be his turn. Now the conflict is here in East Anglia. We do need to set the strength for East Anglia before we start. Now, Guthrum has a power that up to 3 Dane armies in Guthrum's region are +1 strength. Guthrum is in the region, so each of those Dane armies are +1 strength. So they're 2 each, so that's 6, and then Guthrum is 1, so the Dane strength is 7. And the Saxon strength is 1, 2, 3 currently. So that's where we begin. Alright, we begin the conflict phase with Uhtred. Just to show something different, we're going to have he's going to play a hero card. So he's going to put that in his play area. He places Ethelwald, places that figure in any region. And heroes are always the same allegiance as their leader that they belong to. So you can take a ring and put that around their base. I'm going to go ahead and put him in Wales, since that's where the next conflict's going to be in. His ring will be set to Dane, because that's what Uhtred is. And then he has a power. He can count as 1 West Saxon or 1 Dane when scoring, only for Uhtred. And then he has this permanent power. If Ethelwald is in the current conflict region. Whenever you pass, you may move him to an adjacent region and or switch allegiance. And of course he counts as one strength. Alright, so that was a primary action, so that's going to end Uhtred's turn. I think now it's Guthrum's turn. He's pretty happy with the way things are in the current conflict region. The Danes are winning that. So I think he thinks he's just going to pass, but he's going to go ahead and take the prepare for invasion token. Because he's doing that, and there's one peace token on the board, he gets one action token. So he would take that. So now he's permanently passed. So now we come to Alfred. He's down to only 2 cards in hand, but he does have quite a few action tokens that he can take market actions with. He's going to spend 1 action token to do the primary action as card, spend 1 action token to move King Alfred 1 region. So he's going to move himself here into East Anglia, and that will raise the Saxon strength by 1. Alright, since that's a primary action, that ends his turn. We now go back to Uhtred. Uhtred's a little concerned that even if they win this conflict, that Guthrum is going to be scoring a lot more points than he does. He got 12 last time where Uhtred only got 8, and now his affinity is even higher. So with the Danes. So Uhtred may have something up his sleeve. So I think what he's going to do is spend 1 of his tokens to take his primary move action, so he can, he's got to spend 2 to move Uhtred 1 region. So he's going to move here into Mercia, but then after Uhtred moves, he may move an additional region. So he's going to move here into East Anglia. Now that, because he's got a strength of 2 in round 1, that's going to increase the Saxon strength by 2. And that is a primary action, so that's going to end his turn. Guthrum cannot take a turn because he permanently passed. So now we come back to Alfred. Alfred's going to spend 3 to take this England is Born to place 1 Mercian, 1 West Saxon, and 1 Northumbrian, each in a different region. So he's got to spend 3 action tokens for that. So he's going to put a West Saxon here in East Anglia. That will increase that strength by 1. He'll put a Mercian in Mercia, and he'll put a Northumbrian in Wales. And then got to shift all these over. Alright, got those shifted. And that was a primary action, so that's going to end Alfred's turn. So now we go back to Uhtred. Uhtred is going to play this Tactical Strike. Move 1 army to an adjacent region, then remove up to 2 armies from that region, then gain 1 West Saxon, 1 Mercian, or 1 Northumbrian affinity. So he's going to move 1 Dane from East Anglia, and then he'll remove 2 Mercians from there. Then he's going to gain 1 West Saxon affinity, moving it up to there. And now we've lowered the strength of the Danes here in East Anglia by 2, because each one of those is worth 2 because of Guthrum's ability. So now Guthrum is probably smelling a rat here, but unfortunately he's taken the prepare for invasion token and passed permanently for this conflict, so there's nothing he can do. Arthur's starting to maybe see some light here. So Arthur is going to do this no mercy action for 3 action tokens. So he gets to remove 1 army from 2 adjacent regions. So he's going to remove 1 Dane here and 1 in Mercia here. And that is going to lower the strength in East Anglia by another 2. So now the strength is tied there. And then he gains 2 victory points. He'll put those in his area, and then we got to shift these down. Alright, I got those shifted down, and now it is Uhtred's turn again. Uhtred is going to play this primary action of change of heart, so he's going to change his allegiance to Saxon. So he'll have to flip his ring over, and now those two Dane strength will be that he was providing will be decreased, and now there's two. He's providing 2 West Saxon strength. And we also need to switch the allegiance of the hero that he controls, because the hero always stays the allegiance of their leader. So Ethelwald switches over to Saxon allegiance as well. And then he does gain 1 Dane affinity, so he changes his allegiance and then he gains 1 Dane affinity. Guthrum is none too pleased with that, but again, nothing he can do because he's taken the invasion token and passed permanently. Alfred likes the way things stand now, so he's going to pass, and Uhtred is now happy with how things are as well, so he's going to pass also. So that's 3 passes consecutively, because Guthrum has to pass, Alfred passes, and Uhtred passes as well. So now we'll resolve the conflict. So the Saxons won, so we will place a peace token in East Anglia to the Saxon side up. So now the winners get to score victory points, so we'll just start with Uhtred. He can choose up to 5 armies from the winning side. There's only 4 in there, but 3 of them are West Saxon, which he has affinity here, so he gets 2 each for those 3, so 6. That's 6 points. And then 1 is Mercian, which he has affinity of 1, so he gets 1 point for that, so he gets a total of 7 victory points. He might have done better sticking with the Danes and winning that, but he was hoping to slow Guthrum's scoring down. Alfred's on the winning side, so now he's going to score points. So he will choose those 4 armies as well, the 3 West Saxon and the 1 Mercian. However, he gets 3 points for each West Saxon, so that's 3 times 3, that's 9. And then for the Mercian, he gets 3 points as well, so he's going to get a total of 12 victory points. So that worked out better for Alfred, because he had higher affinity with the West Saxons and the Mercians than Uhtred did. Uhtred was down here and here. Now, you would think Guthrum would be the loser and get the 2 action tokens and an additional 2 action tokens for being the sole loser, but he's got a trick up his sleeve himself. When Guthrum is in the conflict region and his side loses, he may change allegiance before scoring. So that's what he's going to do. He's going to change his allegiance. And now he's Saxon as well, so now he gets to score. Of course, that he may have been better off taking the action tokens, because he's got 0 West Saxon. So if he chooses all 4 of these, he's got 0 West Saxon, so he wouldn't get any points for that. He would just get 1. So you know what? He's not going to do that, because he's not going to score as well for doing that. So he would rather just take the 4 action tokens for losing, the 2 for being the loser and 2 more for being the sole loser. I think that's what he would rather do. Although he would get, because Alfred has this power, if any player changes allegiance to Saxon and their leader is in Alfred's region, they gain 3 action points. So because Guthrum, if he did switch and he's in the same region that Alfred is, he would get 3 action points for that, and then he would get the 1 victory point. But he's gonna just take the 4, or he's gonna take the 4 action tokens for losing, 2 for losing and 2 for being the sole loser. All right, so he's not gonna switch. All right, we don't have more than 5 armies, so we don't have to disband. So now we move the conflict token to the region with the succession token. The player that holds the invasion token gets to move the succession token to one of the other regions that does not have a peace token or the conflict token. So he's going to, that's Guthrum, and he's going to move it to Wessex. Alright, the invasion token is placed back on the board. We need to set the strength of the current conflict region, which is Wales. So it's 1, 2 for the Danes, and 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 1 for Ethelwald for the Saxons, so 5 for the Saxons. So currently it's 2 to 5. So just to mention how heroes can work, if this conflict ended how it is now, at with the Saxons being the winner, and since Uhtred is currently aligned with the Saxons, when he went to score here, he would get to choose these 4 armies. Remember, you can choose up to 5, including heroes, so he would get to choose these 4 armies to score, and his hero of Ethelwald, who would count as 1 West Saxon for scoring. Now, anybody else that's aligned with the Saxons would not get to score to choose Ethelwald. Only the leader who owns that hero can choose them for scoring. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So now, Uhtred was the last one to pass at the last conflict, so the player to the left of him, Guthrum, would get to take the first turn, and so he would start with this next conflict. Anyway, I think you can see now how the game plays. So we would go until all 5 of the regions have had their conflicts resolved in them, and then we would go to the cleanup phase, as I talked about in the rules overview. Do the cleanup phase, then deal out cards from the round 2 deck and have another draft, and then go through another round of conflicts, just the same, resolving a conflict in each region, and then going to final scoring. So I think that gives you a good idea how the game plays. So I'm going to wrap it up there. It's already getting to be a pretty long video. So I will say I do enjoy this game, but I don't feel it really conveys the theme or the story of the Last Kingdom TV series. If I was designing a game, based on the Last Kingdom TV series, I'd be having these leaders have, trying to accomplish a goal that they were, trying to accomplish in the series, like maybe the Uhtred character trying to retake and control Bebbanburg, maybe King Alfred trying to unite all the regions under, one king, something like that, giving each of these leaders some sort of goal that went along with their story in the series. This just seems very generic to me, and again, to me, doesn't convey the story of The Last Kingdom, which I was hoping it would do more than it does. But that said, just as a game, I do enjoy this game and look forward to playing it with other people, not just playing it solo as 3 players by myself. So take that as you will. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.